we need farming systems that produce healthy and nutritious food in a way that doesn't destroy the ecosystems on which we all depend for life. We need a farming system that saves the environment and is profitable to farmers. And we need a social system that enables consumers to access the healthy food that they need.
Hi, welcome back to our podcast, The Zero Hunger Project. I'm your host, Suman Roy,
I'm Stacey O'Neill.
and today we have a conversation with Dr. Evan Fraser. And Dr. Fraser has been, we're going to talk here a lot about Dr. Fraser from Stacia. However, the topic we're going to talk about is farming the future, climate innovation, and ending hunger sustainability. Stacey, do you want to talk about Dr. Fraser a little
I'm
bit?
very happy to introduce Dr. Fraser. He's the director of the Arrell Food Institute and a professor of geography at the University of Guelph. Internationally recognized for his research on global food security and sustainable agriculture, Dr. Fraser leads interdisciplinary teams that develop solutions to feed a growing population while adapting to climate change. He is also co-author of Uncertain Harvest, The Future of Food on a Warming Planet, which explores how climate shocks, water stress, technological shifts, and geopolitics all intersect to create new challenges and new possibilities for food systems. Dr. Fraser advocates for a both and approach, combining agricultural technology, indigenous knowledge, policy change, and community-based innovation to transform how food is grown, shared, and governed. As Canada's agri-tech sector grows, Dr. Fraser is one of the most influential voices pushing for food systems that are climate resilient, equitable, and future ready. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Nice to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me.
That's amazing, Dr. Fraser. Before we get into the question, I have one burning question because we've been talking on the other podcast, and this topic keeps on coming. What is happening with our national food policy? And you're
No pressure.
no pressure.
Right out of the gate.
So, I'm really excited that Canada and the first Liberal government, almost 10 years ago now, made food policy a priority and created a thing called the National Food Policy, or actually it's called the Food Policy for Canada, which really attempted to bring aspects of the food system together under one policy umbrella. So we're talking about food waste, together with trade and export, together with the quality of our environment, workers' rights, and of course, health and nutrition for consumers. Over the last 10 years, a number of very important initiatives have been launched as part of Canada's food policy, which includes things such as the school nutrition program, which was announced about a year or so ago. Now we are in a new government right now, so I am looking forward to working with the new minister in whatever capacity the new minister, who we don't even know who the new minister is, may be. So I stand, and I'm sure my colleagues that have participated in various food policy for Canada debates, we stand at the ready to help in any way that the new minister would like us to help. Beyond that, I can't say anything. I'm very proud of the accomplishments of the last period of time, and look forward to working on behalf of Canadians for the next period of time.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
That seems very positive.
That is positive and hopeful.
Yeah.
I really love that.
Mhm.
So one of the phrases we heard from you, farm the future. And what does that look like in practical terms? And who needs to be on the table to do it right?
So, it's a great question. And I really, Stacia, I really appreciated your introduction that's everything that I'm going to say is a this and a that kind of conversation. This isn't a single bullet or a single solution or a single set of prescriptions. It's a portfolio, perhaps is the right word. And the first big division is we need farming systems that produce healthy and nutritious food in a way that doesn't destroy the ecosystems on which we all depend for life. So that's very much of a production-focused approach that has to do with the profitability of our farms, but it also has to do with things like the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that come off of our farms or the way that we steward or protect soil or biodiversity. Those are very production-oriented problems. Equally important are creating a social and economic environment so that people are empowered to make healthy choices and get access to healthy, adequate nutrition year-round that is culturally appropriate and suitable for an active and healthy lifestyle. And that really shifts the conversation away from the farm and towards economics and social policy. So do people have the money to afford healthy food? Can people go to the grocery store and have the education and knowledge they need to make healthy choices and be able to prepare healthy and nutritious food? So really it's at least two dimensions, one focusing on production, profitability, and the environment at the farm end, and one focusing on healthy, affordable access and empowered consumers at the consumer end. And then we can get into a whole lot more detail. But my primary answer is, to farm the future, we need a farming system that saves the environment and is profitable to farmers. And we need a social system that enables consumers to access the healthy food that they need.
I mean, that sounds like such a tight package, and it's like inconceivable the amount of work that's going to have to go into making sure that happens. But it all seems very possible, actually, talking to you in a way. We've had conversations with other people, and I've sort of felt a little dejected, but now I feel kind of hopeful and happy about it.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Well, it's not easy. I mean, it isn't easy, but it's doable. I mean, I'm not saying we need cold fusion in a bottle or a quantum computer that works. I'm saying that we can make practical, pedestrian even investments and practical and pedestrian policy initiatives, and we can have a food system that works for the 21st century. It's not impossible, but it takes work. It takes a lot of coordination, and there's a lot that has to be done.
Fair. I mean, that's fair, but I'm feeling like optimistic. I feel good about it.
This is a solvable problem, is what I'm saying.
I love it.
And at the end of the day, that's the message that needs to be sent out to average people. I am a person who, functions in the sort of larger social justice world, but doesn't know a whole lot about food security or agri-food systems or any of these things. My learning curve on all of this has been vertical. And I've been talking to people through this podcast, and I've come away a lot of times going, I don't know anything about anything, but it feels kind of like we're screwed a little bit. Like, it's a political issue. The political arm of this isn't functioning very well. It's, an infrastructure issue. The infrastructure isn't sort of doing very well. But, it's nice to have these conversations where people say, yes, it's an issue. Yes, it's complicated. I can handle complicated, but it's possible. It's solvable.
Exactly.
It's a doable thing. I wanted to ask to that end about what Canada can do to lead in terms of food security on a global scale in a warming world, right, where things are getting hotter, and not just in agriculture, but to your point, in ethics and research and trade and all these other areas.
So, I mean, I'll keep my comments sort of in that broad division of farm-related and consumer-related, because I think that's a helpful distinction, and it really focuses the attention on what problem are we trying to solve at this point in the conversation. So let's start with the consumer end again. And here the statistics are very dire. The new hunger count came out last week. 1 in 4 Canadians is living in a food insecure family right now. It is a staggeringly depressing scenario. I just finished. I do a lot of volunteer work with the charity. It's called Feed Opportunity Maple Leaf Center for Action on Food Insecurity. And I just literally earlier today was at our quarterly board meetings. And there, I mean, really, I think there's 2 big levers we can, as a society, pull on to get our own house in order, by which I mean not live in a country where 1 in 4 kids is in a food insecure household, which should be a national embarrassment.
Well, and also just to remind people, and every 4th person that you walk past on the street, like just to put a face on that statistic, when you're walking down a busy street anywhere in Toronto or Canada, it's every 4th person you walk by is living in a food insecure.
How is it possible that we're in a situation where 1 in 4 is in this circumstance? At any rate, I think there's probably 2 things that we're actively working on to try to address this. Well, 3. One is to reinforce the emergency food aid programs, which is, there's 2 things I think that we can, as social activists, advocate for to address the consumer problem of food insecurity in this country. And a third one, which is the Band-Aid. So I'll start with the Band-Aid. The Band-Aid is food banks and emergency food aids. We unfortunately are in a situation in our country where we're dependent on food banks and community food centers and community pantries and places where people can get hampers of food at an emergency. We have to support those organizations, not as a long-term fix, but as a short-term Band-Aid to help Canadians through this very, very serious problem. in terms of a long-term fix, there's two things that many of us are working on. The first would be some sort of subsidy rebate for specifically targeting food. Now, we tried a little bit of that at the federal level with the GST rebate over the last few years, which was sometimes called a grocery rebate or grocery subsidy. I think we can do more. And there's a number of charities and philanthropists right now who are working on figuring out ways of providing food subsidies for people as a way of addressing, some of the underlying issues here. Now, that's not going to help people get a better job or afford rent better, but it is part of the way there. Another thing that I think we need to work on is helping Canadians, low-income Canadians, access benefits. In our country, there is a not adequate, but not terrible social safety net that is administered largely through the tax code. So you have to file taxes in order to qualify for benefits. There's a new disability benefit that will help. We have to help people access those benefits, which means helping people file their taxes. And there's all sorts of barriers that prevent low-income and economically marginalized people, often racialized families, from filing their taxes. So that's another big thing. But then there's two last things, which I'm not even talking about, which are really the fixes: guaranteed minimum income and affordable rent. And until we actually achieve, I think, those two social policies, we are never really going to come at the root causes of food insecurity. So I'll pause there. I'm happy to talk about the farm end of the spectrum, but let's just pause and maybe talk for a little bit longer about the consumer end.
And I
love that.
I also think that, there's a grocery store monopoly in this country as well that is something that needs to be kind of fixed a little bit. I think there are a couple of people holding a lot of the strings, and it's making it very challenging for the average person to cost out where to get groceries.
Yeah, for me, the bigger issue is the cost of rent. No matter what the grocery environment is or isn't or should or shouldn't be, rent is a fixed cost. Data and mortgage payments and credit card payments, those are fixed costs. Food is a variable cost, and people will, if we're in a situation where people are paying $2,500 for a modest apartment, they will cut back on food in order to make ends meet. I think that the housing affordability crisis drives a lot of this conversation, unfortunately.
100%. And in our food banks, and I've said in a few episodes before, a big chunk of our clients, they're spending almost 75% of their income in housing. So where are they going to spend on food?
Yeah, that is exactly the heart of the issue that we're talking about. In the context of a housing crisis, food gets squeezed, and I think that increasing wages, figuring out ways of getting people into affordable housing is the precursor to fundamentally addressing the food insecurity crisis in this country. I agree.
See, again, now that's something, as a person who doesn't talk about this every day, makes incredible sense to me that you would say that, but I wouldn't necessarily have put those two things together. Even with all of the social justice work that I've done, I mean, obviously now that you've said it, I'm sure I've talked about it before, but I keep coming back to what the average person understands about this problem. And I don't know if I'm reflective of the average person because I haven't been involved in this discourse for very long, but I learn things all the time. And when you make comments like that, then you think, oh, like the roots of this tree, metaphorically speaking, they're far reaching. And that's, I think, where it starts to get overwhelming because it's like, well, how do we fix affordable housing? I mean, like, who else do we need to be talking to solve this? Like, what do we do? Who do we call?
Well, like I said, I spent the morning in board meetings with the Maple Leaf Center for Action on Food Security, and to me, where I'm seeing the most practical ways of nudging the dial or bending the arc or whatever the metaphor you want is the two that I started with. One, this interest in figuring out ways of providing I'm just going to call it a grocery subsidy. And there are different mechanisms and a lot of nuance and complexity there, but providing people with access to essentially a rebate for buying groceries, that is a shown, demonstrated way that we can reduce food insecurity. And it can be linked with, say, food prescriptions. There's a whole bunch of different ways of doing that. And the second one is the issue of benefits, getting people better able to file their taxes, not quote, leaving benefits on the table that they're entitled to. Now, there's problems with both of those systems. For example, the benefits a person receives are typically linked to last year's taxes, and a person might lose their job and fall into a position of food insecurity much more recently than that. So it's not a perfect system, but I think to keep this this conversation from getting mired in the sense of doom and gloom and impossible, those are two things that we can do that won't be a complete fix, but will help in the food banks and community food centers and pantries in the short term, in the medium term, getting people access to benefits and grocery rebates, and then in the long term, this big thorny issue of affordable housing and low wages.
Great points.
We've been talking with some folks about innovations in technology in food production and innovation in technology and food security, frankly. And you've talked about the dangers of sort of over-relying on tech fixes for that type of thing. Can you talk to us about how we balance innovation and food justice and technology without doing more damage than good?
So we're now going to shift, I think, more from talking about consumers to more talking about producers. And it's not a completely neat division, but I think when we start talking about technologies, we start really seeing potential benefits in terms of, say, producing more food with less environmental impact. And I'll just give you a small example from my own personal background. As a teenager in the 80s and 90s, I would spend summers with my grandfather in Niagara. And we had a tractor, and Grandpa would drive slowly through the fields, and there was sort of strawberries or sweet corn or tomatoes or melons. And I would have buckets of fertilizer sort of on either side of me on this platform we had on the back of the tractor, and I would simply throw handfuls of fertilizer pellets out onto the fields. And I'm going to say that half of that fertilizer was wasted. It didn't land at the right place at the right time for a plant to integrate. About half of that fertilizer that we applied in that way would have been lost. It didn't land at the right place or the right time for plants to use. And so two things happened to that fertilizer. It either went up in the air as a greenhouse gas, largely nitrous oxide, or it would have worked into the water table and ended up in Lake Erie feeding algae blooms. So that was 1980s and 90s technology, just sort of broadcast fertilizer. Today, tractors are so much more efficient. Artificial intelligence and GPS systems mean that farmers can plant the right seed in the right spot and give it the right amount of fertilizer. And we see yields going up and fertilizer use, diesel use, all the sort of farm inputs, all the things a farmer would do, going down. And I've got a friend in Saskatchewan who has invested heavily in these sorts of technologies. And he can show that he's producing more food on less land, that his inputs are down, and critically, that he's probably also carbon neutral, that he's, the amount that he's spending in terms of greenhouse gas emissions is probably compensated by the amount that his better soil management practices have absorbed into the soils in the form of organic matter. So he's got healthier soils that are absorbing carbon. So that's the potential for technology. I think that if we really want technology to unlock those sort of changes, those sort of benefits, there's a few things we have to do. First of all, we have to create financial incentives for farmers to use those technologies in that way. Right now, farmers are paid to produce food. They're not paid to sequester carbon. So a payment service that pays farmers to absorb greenhouse gases would mean that the potential of these technologies gets deployed in that way. Until we actually have a financial reason for farmers to do that, however, we can't expect farmers to do it. So that would be sort of one suggestion that I think, a structure to pay farmers what are sometimes called for ecosystem services, a carbon credit, for instance, a biodiversity credit, a water credit. And then we would see the potential of these technologies being deployed not only to boost production, but also to reduce the environmental impact of farming.
I see, again, here's another thing that
Great
is like, this
achievable
seems
idea.
totally feasible to me.
Great achievable idea. So, Dr. Fraser, I know you are advising, or you've advised in the past, the federal government, but if you were advising the United Nations or the new federal government, what's one bold food system reform you would recommend to help end hunger globally?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of ways of answering that question, and you've asked for one, and I'm going to dodge, and I'll do a little bit of explanation. I mean, at the moment, we have enough food on the planet with one very significant exception. So if you just take the total number of calories produced on the planet divided by the total number of people, there is more than enough. About almost 3,000 calories is produced per person per day on this planet. So this then becomes, at that level, it seems like a distributional problem, that we waste it and people don't get access to it. And as a result, we have some people getting too much food and other people not getting enough. To really address that problem, we need poverty reduction, social protection, guaranteed income, affordable housing, that cluster of social initiatives that would make consumers at the consumer end better able to afford food. Now, the one really big exception to that is we don't produce enough fresh fruits and vegetables for everybody to eat a nutritionally healthy diet. Statistics that I've worked with suggest if we were all going to eat, say, the Canadian Food Guide globally, like if that became our global reference, we would need to quadruple the amount of fruits and vegetables that we produce globally to make so that we could all have enough. So we immediately then flip over to more of a production question, and we need a humongous investment in the research and technologies and marketing of fruits and vegetables to radically increase fruits and vegetable production globally. So that would be one sort of cluster of things, I'd say. The other one is how I answered your last question, which is farming can be a force for environmental good. We absolutely know it. Farming can shift from being a source of greenhouse gas emissions to a sink of greenhouse gases. If we want that to happen, we need a system that rewards farmers for absorbing greenhouse gases. And so some sort of, quote, payment for ecosystem services, which is a funny academic way of saying giving farmers a financial incentive to use the technology to, say, absorb greenhouse gases, would be my second sort of critical idea.
Once again, I'm going to repeat myself. Your ideas seem not easily, but so doable.
I guess it's just because you seem so matter of fact about how you just come up with these answers and you're like, well, here's what we have to do. It's a very complicated problem, but having it laid out like that feels like it's something we could at least arrange and explain to people and get some movement forward on it. I'm interested to know if you have any Indigenous, rural, or youth-fed food systems work that's being done. If you have an idea, any of those that needs more attention. Are there projects that are being done that you feel aren't getting the attention that they deserve?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes, of course. And the caveat to that, and I've got a few things I'll say, but the caveat to that is I'm not the right person to answer that question. I'm a settler. I'm a middle-aged dude sitting in downtown Guelph with a university job. So, I mean, I would say I could connect you with wonderful Indigenous colleagues and friends and partners all over Canada, but especially in the remote and northern regions who are doing fabulous stuff. So one project that I'm aware of, which I'm super delighted the community was able to get off the ground, was it was sort of a 2 or 3 part project that gave Indigenous hunters that were essentially working on the mine, giving them enough salary they could sort of reduce the number of hours this is in the territories, reduce the number of hours they worked on the mine, get out hunting as a result, train the next generation in hunting. And then there was a community freezer, food preparation, food preservation infrastructure part of that. And so it was a community-led initiative to essentially provide enough salary so people didn't have to work for a wage as much, and then they could reconnect with the land, hunt for, I think it was largely caribou we're talking about, get the next generation involved, and then store that food in community freezers. I take no credit whatsoever. I am simply telling the story of this wonderful project.
Are there any rural programs? Are there any other programs that are non-Indigenous, for example?
So, I mean, there are tons. Let me instead pivot to tell you about a new project that a national network of us that I have the privilege of helping co-lead is running. So we just got $17 million from the federal government to stand up a program called Sustainable Food Systems for Canada, SF4C. We just got the funding announcement in the last couple of months. We just had our kickoff workshop and meeting last week in Ottawa. And there we've got Indigenous community partners from the North in particular. We've got all of Canada's ag schools, a number of our key colleges. It's co-led by Dr. Lenore Newman at the University of Fraser Valley on the West Coast. And what we're going to do is is very soon, like starting in the fall, stand up a training platform that will be largely delivered online to ensure that people with a good idea about how to build a program or a project, or they've got this crazy notion of a new product to sell or a community organization they want to launch, they get can access anywhere in Canada, they access the basic training they need to develop that program. So that's part one. Part two is we will then be running design jams, pitch contests, hackathons, that sort of high octane camps where we will bring people regionally at first and then nationally a couple of times a year together to work on those ideas and develop really good projects. And then we will be celebrating and supporting those with mentoring and funding. So that's part three. So it's a training program, what we're calling a quote collision program, and a mentoring program for the best ideas. And that we're really trying to do is we're really trying to build this in partnership with organizations like Bioenterprise and Creative Destruction Labs, which have access to venture capital funding for the sort of the commercial enterprises, with community groups that are better established for those social enterprises. And like I said, we've got partners from every region in Canada participating. And our goal is after 5 years to have tried to ignite a system, an ecosystem of innovation for more sustainable food systems in our country. And that will have lots of connectivity for Indigenous rural community projects to come forward, assuming we're successful. And so I would say, let's talk in a couple years, and I will hopefully be able to connect you with some really great social innovators and early stage entrepreneurs who can tell their stories way better than I'll be able to.
Love that.
That's
I love
progressive
everything about
thinking.
that. Yeah, it's amazing.
That exactly is progressive thinking.
So we've come now to the time in the podcast where I get to ask the question that I ask everybody, and it's a two-pronger. The first one is, what is best case scenario that you see? And the second part of that question is, what is the question that when nobody is asking you? What are the things that you wish you could bring to the fore that don't come up very often when you get interviewed or when you're writing papers or things like that? Is there anything that you feel that we're remiss in asking you?
Sure. So, I mean, the best case scenario is, again, I've been using this sort of twofold: producer on one side, consumer on the other side. Lots of connectivity, of course, but I think that to solve to make sure we're clear on what sort of problem we're solving, I would like to see a Canada where we don't have 1 in 4 people food insecure, and that we have made significant strides to reducing food insecurity across this country. The Maple Leaf Center that I volunteer for has a target of a 50% reduction by 2030. We are rapidly counting down the clock, and we are moving in the wrong direction. So that fills me with dismay. And I want a future where people can afford to live a dignified life, have a diet that supports their active living in a culturally appropriate way. And I've given you a few hints as to where I think there's some short, medium, and long-term goals there. But I mean, this is a doable problem. This is a tractable and solvable problem. Similarly, I want to live in a country where our agricultural system absorbs greenhouse gases and protects biodiversity while producing nutritious, affordable food for Canadians. And again, I think I've given you a couple of hints as to where I think that pathway could come from. And I'm just going to double down on where I opened with the question nobody asks. Too often people think that food and hunger can be solved by changing the food system from a producer end. And I hope the message that I've communicated is there's a lot we need to do at the producer end in terms of making sure our farmers have incomes and are profitable and that our environment's protected. But fundamentally, food insecurity won't be solved by food fixes. Food insecurity fundamentally will be solved by economic and social policies related to housing and wages. And that message, I hope, is loud and clear. And I get frustrated sometimes that it's not fully appreciated in interviews.
Well, and that really is the take-home message for everybody, to put this in a larger context, to understand how these things, it's not just about groceries. It's about so much more than groceries. And that message certainly you delivered loud and clear today.
And Dr. Fraser, I think it's time to say thank you. But yes, to reiterate what Stacia just said, and this is the whole essence of our podcast overall. We understand that it's not a one-prong solution. There needs to be all different part of solutions that needs to happen. And you articulated it so very well.
Oh, nice of you to say that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice chatting with you.
So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that.
It was wonderful. Thank you very, very much. It was great chatting with you.
Dr. Fraser had so many amazing, simple, I'm saying simple,
They're not simple.
within quotes, but it sounded like it's so doable. It was so encouraging.
Well, I'll tell you what happened for me is that he provided an enormous amount of clarity about where these problems are coming from, how the needle is going to be moved in terms of what problem needs to be addressed first. I mean, these are the types of things that the average person needs to hear about.
Mhm.
Of course, it makes complete sense to say we need to solve the affordable housing problem before we can fix food insecurity because people can't afford to live, they can't pay their rent. They're not going to buy groceries over rent. They're going to pay for their rent
100%.
over groceries. And when you say things like that, and when he says it's not so much a farming problem, because we've been focusing on agriculture and farming and all of this, it's a social problem to just lay that out.
So I think, and this is not just Canada, this is globally.
Of course.
Globally, we have been focusing a lot on, and rightfully so. If you talk 20 years ago, farming, 20, 30 years ago, farming was an issue.
Yeah.
And they have worked through it. They've done fantastic. They've got to a stage where farming is going in a right direction.
Yeah.
His point about every person, 3,000 calorie per day
Yeah.
is being produced already.
Yeah.
We need to focus on how people are getting those 3,000 calories.
Yes, because there
That
are
is where the
ways and
problem.
ways and ways to eat to consume 3,000 calories, right? I mean, you can do that in a healthy way and not a healthy way. The thing that I found astonishing was he said we needed to produce 4 times the amount of fruits and vegetables for people to get a balanced meal.
So what I got are, it's not about balanced meal, it's about if somebody's following the Canada Food Guide, for
Right.
example.
Okay.
So
So a
there is a
healthy
slightly
meal?
a healthy meal, or um, the reality is very few people are following the Canada Food Guide uh, because of various reasons. However, I think we are one thing that I 100% agree that we are way below on growing fresh fruits and vegetables than we need.
Which is incredible when you consider the places in this country that grow food. I mean, right? Like the
So coming to
Guelph,
Canada,
BC,
yeah, but
all of those places.
coming to Canada, like a big chunk of our agriculture land
Mhm.
is not good enough to always grow fruits and vegetables.
Mhm.
So that is a challenge in countries like Canada.
Okay,
It's not south though.
Suman, you need to stop saying like I'm trying to be optimistic, and you're like, yes, but now the land that we grow food on is
Yeah.
crap, and I'm
No,
like,
but
okay, I'm gonna be in a corner breathing into a bag. I need you. I need there to be somewhere
So
where this isn't a
no,
problem.
but it is a problem because we need to identify this as a problem, and we need to have solutions that can actually help. So the reason I point that out is fruits and vegetables might be something that we need to get from outside,
Yeah.
or have greenhouses, or have different solutions to grow. I know, especially in downtown Toronto, I know there are farms that is inside warehouses that's doing vertical fresh
Yeah,
fruits and
which is so
vegetables.
cool. The innovations that are happening
Exactly.
in that are very cool.
So I can say that the land is not good enough in Saskatchewan to grow fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
But where there is a will, there is a way.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that we need to take out of this.
Right.
We need to be creative. One solution doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
We need to work with partners who is in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And as we talked the other day with Ambassador Bob Ray, that
Mhm.
it is one world.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to really embrace that idea of one world and work together, because there are things that we do, like, for example, wheat, pulses.
Corn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like we do more than 50% of world's
Canola.
pulses.
Canola.
Canola.
Yeah, we grow
So
a lot of
we
canola.
have a lot of different things that we have that some other countries may not have. And it's just the work we do to exchange and trade.
Okay. So just to review the bidding, as it were, we have until 2030, which is in 5 years, to
4.5.
oh,
Okay.
great.
I am
To
Mr. Negative today.
great.
Hello.
To fix affordable housing, the dirt that we grow our crops in, getting people access to pay their taxes, get social systems, get there have to be government subsidies that happen in all of these things to prescribe food as medicine so people don't. I mean,
You know,
we have 4.5 years.
yes, but like I say this once again, not trying to be negative at all, but today, 1 in 4 Canadians do not have sufficient food to eat.
I realize that I'm
By 2030, if that number is 1 in 10, I'll be happy.
okay.
We may not have 0 in 10 or
Okay,
0 in 4.
so the takeaway is that we need to manage our expectations.
Exactly. Like, really, are we going to have by 2030 realistically a hunger
No,
free world?
no,
That's not going to happen.
no, it's not.
That's not going to happen. But can it go down drastically with these innovative projects, these learnings from different parts of the world that we can all embrace to make our life better? 100%.
What I would like to have is a room that has a global set of flip charts in it, and we're writing down all of these things that people like Dr. Fraser have been laying out for us, and then check boxes to see how we're doing. Because I feel like, are we talking about all these things in the abstract, or are they actually moving forward?
So I'm not going to say much because this is a project that we are working on, but something like this, and you didn't even know about it, is in the works that we are
See,
planning to do.
you should have brought me into this problem sooner, and
I
would have
know.
solved it much
So
earlier.
we are, and by the time this episode airs, I'm not sure if we have been already executed it or we are still working on the execution, but it'll be very soon that we are working on some project like this.
That's
that
going
you're
to
gonna
keep
hear.
track of all the stuff that, like,
Keep-
it's like a global checklist of things that need to happen.
It is, and I'm going to do my shameless plug that a lot of that you're going to find right in this book,
Okay.
The Zero Hunger Project, where we talk about the successes that happened in various countries around the world on the projects they've done and the failures. So we
Yeah.
can learn from our failures. It's not all success. Various countries have tried projects, it did not work.
Yeah,
and
but
we
at
can
least
learn
they're
from it.
doing something.
Exactly, and we can learn from it. So others are not repeating and failing again. So there are some great stories. If you haven't purchased yet, please get your copy of this, the Zero Hunger Project. And there'll be more projects, and we're going to talk a lot about this over the next little while.
Okay, I'm excited. First of all, I love a good checklist.
Yeah.
And I love accountability. And,
Perfect.
and I love that we're going to be doing things. We're going to be keeping track of all of the things that need to happen in order for this to get fixed. It feels hopeful.
We will do it.
Okay.
And together, we will have a hunger free world.